This is HBR News number 406, Nashville Covenant School Shooting Update. Are women more depressed than men? Where we discuss the news of the week and give it the Badger treatment. Hello everybody and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian. I'm joined by, as always, my austere patriarchs and our handmaiden, that is Hannah, Mike J, and Dr. Ranricam. Today on the HBR News Show, we're going to be discussing more Hose Mad of the Week, or Hose Sad of the Week, because we're talking about depression. We're going to be talking about the most recent news regarding the trans Nashville shooter, some updates regarding the Cashapp founder Bob Lee, who was murdered. We covered that a couple of weeks ago. Depression rates apparently are spiking amongst women and more. So please stick around because it's going to be a good time. If we have time, I have a bonus story that I learned about. It's not anything big, but if we have time and the sausage isn't too long, I'll mention it at the very end. So hopefully we'll get to that point. So anyways, before we get started, please hit that like button, because if you guys smash like right at the beginning, then more people will be more likely to see us, at least according to what YouTube supposedly does with the algorithm, but who knows. All right. So, and also don't forget to join us on the patron only show, become a member so that you can do that. On today's patron only show, I also have another piece of, it's not news. It's like an opinion piece from a website called thegamer.com, which essentially asks the question, what does it even mean for GTA to go woke? So real brief, you guys might know Rockstar, and they have a very successful franchise of video games called Grand Theft Auto, and they're working on the 6th installment. And we don't know much about it, at least I don't know much about it, except that the protagonist is a woman this time, which has not been done in previous GTA games.
That's not entirely true, Brian.
Well,
it's going to be two.
If you count the online, no, but I mean, unless there's something else I don't know about.
There are two protagonists in the new game. You switch off. They're like a Bonnie and Clyde duo.
Well then, okay. That makes sense. But so one of the protagonists is female, and like a spicy Latina character. And I guess, and again, I don't know much about GTA 6, but I guess people are complaining or something, right? That it might be going the way of Saints Row. And we'll see what thegamer.com has to say about it. They seem to be generally against people having opinions on on whatever's happening with GTA. But I would actually make the argument, and we can do this in the after show when we talk about this story, that Rockstar has been, to some degree, kind of woke from the beginning, since all of their games are satirizing America. And I think that Red Dead Redemption 2 is especially so in that way. But it depends on, I guess, how you would define it. Not that bothers me. I frankly don't care. I have my own other issues with the GTA franchise that it's just kind of repetitive and hasn't really, in my opinion, grown that much over time. So,
Come on, Brian, wasn't the 7th re-release of GTA 5 that universally agreed to be the best?
See, I mean, I never played 5. Maybe this is unfair, but the only GTA game I got into that I bought was 4. And I know a lot of people say it was the most
4
grounded.
was very polarizing. Yeah.
It was, because it wasn't as over the top as San Andreas or Vice City or even the 3. But and I did 4 was fine, but again, just unremarkable unless you like bowling with Roman a lot. Or going to the strip bar. But anyway, we'll find out what 6 has to offer. Maybe there are changes on the way. Maybe it will, go against its whatever, it's known for. But we'll see in the patron show. So if you want to join us on the patron only show, you have to become a Badger by going to feedthebadger.com. Set up a monthly subscription. $5 a month will get you into our Discord, where you will be able to essentially watch all of the additional content, comment on it like you are now, or even join us in the actual conversation and give us your 2 cents. So please consider doing that by going to feedthebadger.com. Also, don't forget, we currently have our monthly fundraiser going so that I could pay the bills and stay housed. And also we can take care of Hannah and just make sure that this show keeps on going. So if you want to support us in that way, please go to feedthebadger.com/support. And lastly, if you want to send us a super chat or a message, you can do so through Rumble or YouTube. But since YouTube takes some money out, and not some, but a lot, and you want to make sure that we get all of it, go to feedthebadger.com/just-the-tip. You can find it on the website, so you don't necessarily have to memorize that. And also, there is a link in the description to go and support us. So with all that out of the way, I do have a couple of super chows, which is a sort of badgerly super chat that I'm going to read out, and then we'll get into today's story. So, maintaining frame commenter. So this was yesterday, but after the show was over. It was in the middle. It was in the early morning hours. Gave us $5 and says, in response to Allison's small comment about men being more neotenous when it comes to play, that's right, women only learn how to be boring. And then he has an angry face. All right, thank you for that, maintaining frame commenter, for commenting on maintaining frame. And then Meredith G just gave us $5 and says, HBR News 406, honey for the Badgers. I'm going to have to dip out early for listening because I have to log back into work. Have a good show. Well, thank you, Meredith. Really appreciate it. Okay, so now that all of that's out of the way, let's get into today's stories. And we're going to start with the Nashville shooting. So I think, Mike J., you did that one, right?
I indeedly did.
Yes, you did.
So, lawyers are representing the families of children attending Nashville's Covenant School want to block the release of the manifesto of the shooter who attacked them last March. The attorney, Eric Osborne, argues that, quote, writings like this tend to inspire additional school shootings. Joining the parents are representatives for the Covenant School and Church, who also wish to block the release of the manifesto, claiming it could further endanger the students and faculty. On the other side of the case, attorney Rob Harvey, who is representing a local media outlet, calls the blocking of the manifesto unprecedented, stating, what happened that day, it's a tragedy, but it doesn't mean that everyone at the school is a victim, end quote. To expand on that a little more, what he's trying to say is the parents of the children who were there aren't necessarily victims, and as again, according to the law, weren't victims, and therefore don't have any real grounds to try to attempt to block this.
Well, it sort of depends on what the manifesto says and who the murderer was attempting to victimize on a collective basis. But I guess we'll never know. Ugh.
Another attorney on the same side, Doug Pierce, who's representing the National Police Association, agrees with Harvey and states that the parents need to know what is in the manifesto if they wish to block it. Court Judge Laisha Miles will be giving her decision by Wednesday, so that's tomorrow, on whether she believes the parents and church's motion to intervene can go forward.
I know I'm probably among the last people to point this out in the last couple of months of news cycles. But yeah, as and when there is the slightest hint of a mass murderer having any recorded inclinations, even fabricated inclinations towards being a white supremacist or an incel or anything vaguely right-wing, this information somehow makes its way past the courts, past any of the wishes or preferences of the families of the victims, and it's plastered across the mainstream media before the bodies are even cold. It's especially the very same mainstream media outlets who would ostensibly claim that the last thing in the world they want to do is encourage right-wing violence, but by the logic outlined there, it's exactly what they're doing. It's especially given that the world is already as overrun with white supremacist incels as they say it is. But it obviously isn't. They're lying, and they know they're lying about that. but they need to take every hand-rubbing, mouth-watering opportunity they can to demonize everything to the right of Stalin, because that's the only way to normalize where they are, i.e. somewhere so far to the left of Stalin that it's off the fucking chart. So this is bullshit. It's not about avoiding copycat killers or avoiding any potential endangering of the students or faculty. What they don't want to endanger is the ideology in question, the activist movement that drove this person to these murders, as outlined in their manifesto, as we can pretty much take as read at this point. So by burying this manifesto, the only people they're protecting are the copycat killers themselves, who most definitely do exist, because they know. Of course they know, as much as everyone else knows. If the motives of the murderer in question were pro-white or pro-male or pro-Christian or pro-cisgendered, we would all have heard about them by now. We'd have heard about them 8 weeks ago. So not only are they protecting the copycat killers, they are actively encouraging them in exactly the way they claim not to be. So any other broken, brainwashed, suicidal cultists who fancy contributing to a cisgendered genocide could go ahead and do so while committing suicide by cop, just to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, along with several children. And they can put the crippling fear of God into everyone who believes in him, all while their precious woke community will never be blamed for it. As a matter of fact, they will only be protected and celebrated for it, as they were in Tennessee within a few days, even though everyone knows it is the fault of this woke community, for want of a much better word. So every time it gets worse, the response is to make it even worse. It's not just accelerationism, it's accelerated accelerationism, it's exponentialism, like at warp fucking speed. If we actually want to discourage violence, the message should be accelerationism doesn't work.
Yeah.
But the message we're getting from the woke media and the oikophobic legal system is leftist accelerationism absolutely does work, because we will do everything in our power to make it work. And I don't know how much longer they can get away with it. Possibly forever. Or just until everyone's dead. It's a murder-suicide cult that won't stop until everyone is in a threaded pile of bodies on the floor with a belly full of poisoned Kool-Aid. Save yourselves, folks. Get some guns, get some chickens, and get off the grid. I'll see you in hell or Heaven's Gate, whichever comes first.
It really depends, I guess, on how the families approach this and how the defense in this case. If there's a legal battle, I guess there would have to be some media outlet that wants the manifesto going up against those parents. If they're just seeking to block this, and the only entity that would be defending it is the local department or the local government, there may not even be a fight. So then in that case, then yeah, they'll block it from being released, because they'll collaborate unless they want something about the school to be released. And I kind of suspect that's part of the problem. There's probably something, that has gone on at that school, either some degree of dysfunction. Like there's been allegations of the school failing to deal with some problems that the student had. I've seen a couple of different allegations of bullying. I've seen a few different allegations of sexual misconduct, and so there's that. They may be trying to protect the school against public allegations of sexual misconduct. But in the meantime, if there are media outlets that are trying to get this manifesto and there is actually a legal battle, they're going to have to prove that it's not a First Amendment violation to keep the media from having that information and disseminating that information. That it's not an attack on the press. That seems like something that would be kind of hinky. They'd have to prove that they were not denying the press information that is in the public interest, and they'd have to prove that it's not in the public interest to know why this attack happened. And I don't think anybody can prove that it's not in the public interest. So that's going to be a difficult one. And the other thing is how far it goes. Like if there is a legal battle and not just rubber stamping, and whoever wants to publish that manifesto or report on the manifesto is willing to, they can take it, because they can sue as a First Amendment freedom of the press issue.
Mm-hmm.
They could take that all the way to the Supreme Court. So we may see a result on this very quickly, or we may see this may take a couple of years to play out, and the ruling may determine whether or not the government is allowed, local or federal, to withhold information about the causes behind a major event that might be in the public interest to know, and withhold that from the media. So this could be a big story. This could be something where we're hearing about it like it's a legal battle, but actually it's already said and done.
Possibly. I was thinking that, like, from what I heard from some accounts, is that their concern is for personal information related to the families and of the victims, because some of the victims were minors. And I was thinking, well, I mean, and
they could block just releasing that
it.
personal information. They can redact.
Yeah,
that.
They could
but
redact.
At the same time,
that's what I'm saying. Like it's not the families that are against it; it's the lawyers. So, and I don't like their claim is that if they put it out there, it's going to inspire more school shootings. And I get that.
That's not an issue that should be used to silence any kind of media. Like if somebody's behaving badly, somebody else behaving badly is a reason to take away your rights. Yeah. Well, we could just say goodbye to all of our rights. Like there's people who are going to behave badly all the time.
No, I get it. I guess what I'm saying is that, like, I don't know that what they're trying to do is cover their ass from some kind of like malfeasance or misbehavior. I think this is about preventing this happening in the future. But here's the thing. Doesn't it suggest, just by the desire to block the release, that there is something damning in it that like sort of like it sort of like confirms, or at least like makes it look like this shooting was not random. It wasn't just some emotional outburst. It was premeditated. It was directed at a specific group of people for a specific reason, and likely because they're Christians. But likely that's what it is, and that's what I'm guessing. One of the reasons for this, and I don't know if this has been like, I read this article that was it was like a piece that was written by the husband of one of the victims, one of the women that was killed in the shooting. And he said that, so there's the school, and connected to the school is a cathedral. And supposedly the shooter shot out, it's 7 times, this stained glass window that had Adam from Adam and Eve on it. So she blew out a stained glass window that pictures the first man. And that was the thing that got my attention before she went in to shoot at the students. So there is something symbolic that appears to have happened. Again, I can't confirm it because maybe the manifesto would tell us more, but I don't think that you would do that like as an accident, especially the same window 7 times, according to husband of the woman who was killed.
I want to know more about the student's record at the school herself. Yeah. Like, 'cause she was a student. She obviously was an adult at the time of the shooting, but she had been a student at that school.
Yeah, years ago though. Like, right. She was like 20 or
think,
something. Yeah.
I think that would be relevant. You know,
Yeah.
maybe if they don't release her manifesto, maybe the media should start digging into, you know, what was her experience as a student at that school like,
Mm-hmm.
because that's something that they should be wondering about. Like, if I was a reporter covering this story, if I was a local reporter covering this story, I would be asking questions about that,
Yeah.
especially after the community was publishing allegations. You know, the community, I'll say the rainbow cult, as opposed to the LGBT community, because they're not the same.
No.
But the
The
rainbow
G
cult was
Mafia.
posting allegations, and I think if a reporter is honestly covering this story, they would have to investigate those allegations. You'd want to be able to report whether that was absolute bullshit or whether there was something to that. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like with students, we know, for instance, that it can really fuck up a boy if a teacher does something like that.
Sure.
So, you know, it's reasonable to assume it would also fuck up a girl. And with the current political situation and the politicization of trans issues and gender identity issues and stuff, it's very possible that, you know, somebody did fuck up this girl as a kid, and that is why she ended up like this. You know,
Maybe.
so it's I don't want to put all the eggs in the idea that the manifesto is going to be specifically condemning of one group of people. Not that I haven't got my suspicions, I do. You know, it's quite likely that it is, but there may be more going on to this than just one thing, and there may be more being protected than just one thing.
Maybe.
And
I-
it's worth
Go ahead.
it's worth going back to first principles. To some degree, they're kind of right in principle. This is what people have been warning us about ever since Columbine, ever since before Columbine. Like, whenever a mass shooting or any sort of massively heinous crime like this happens, the best advice you can give the media is don't make these people famous, because
Mm-hmm.
then you're showing everyone else here is a perfect avenue to become famous, even after death. People, you know, a lot of people really like the idea of being famous even after they're dead. That's why those massive pyramids exist. And so yeah, this is a generally good principle, but people aren't holding to it.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, not everybody who wants to be famous goes out and shoots up a school. You have to have other factors in place too. This is not the route to becoming famous. It is a disturbed person's consideration of a route to become famous. Like they're going to assume they'll become famous this way, and they don't mind dying for it. And it might not even be the goal most of the time. You know, so like I don't believe in the idea of just withholding information to avoid copycats, because I think it protects the people who really should have seen something like this coming, or really should have done better for that kid before they grew up to do something like this, against criticism for failing to properly mentor the kid.
And in this day and age, it's pretty difficult to keep that cat in the bag.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the age of social media, where even, you know, the closest friends of whoever the killer was know who that person was. They have social media. All their friends had social media. All their enemies had social media. And there were some conversations posted online shortly afterwards. I'm not sure how reliable they were, but she posted something along the lines of, "I'm going to die tonight. I'm probably going to be on the news tomorrow." Again, I don't know if it was real, but you know, whoever they are, they certainly must have had a social media. it would be unusual if they didn't, because almost everyone has social media these days.
Mm-hmm.
And even without social media, like you look at the histories of school shooters and mass shooters, a lot of times you can look back at their interactions with people, their lack of socialization, things like that, where they had disturbing behaviors before they got to the point of mass violence.
Yeah.
So like somewhere along the line, somebody failed to identify that, hey, this person is demonstrating tendencies toward violence. They're demonstrating tendencies toward maybe inappropriate anger or something like that, and didn't do anything about it. And that's a big problem in schools to begin with. Like they kind of shuffle kids off to, pass it on to another teacher, pass them on to the next class, put them in detention, expel them, but they don't do anything about the behavior. And when it comes to like demonstration of a mental health condition or demonstration of a way of thinking and a way of engaging with other people that implies a tendency toward violence, like there doesn't seem to be a sufficient response to that. And I think parents a lot of times don't want to believe there's anything wrong with their kid, so they don't get the mental health help they need. And like, we don't know exactly what happened in this case, but like I said, I think there's probably a lot more nuance to this than just parents not wanting the manifesto released because rainbow cult. I think there's probably some people who failed this person when she was a kid that don't want it to come out, that they failed to do what the adults in her life should have done for her.
I just want the manifesto.
Go ahead, Mike.
I've got some interesting thoughts here. The most charitable take I have on them trying to get the whole thing redacted, maybe it's a big ask, and they'll settle for, okay, we don't want the entire thing blocked. We just want to be able to, apply some zebra paint, if you know what I mean, and remove some things. So that's what they're gonna settle for, but that's what they wanted in the beginning, possibly. Now, bumping it out a little bit to the macro, I still find it very funny that we still don't have access to this manifesto, and it keeps bouncing between, I guess, depending on what official you're talking to, either this is just the ramblings of a mad person, or possibly the most dangerous document we've seen since Mein Kampf, which I guess is also technically the ramblings of a mad person, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, I mean, like, the Mexican Nazis manifesto came out right away, right?
That's the other thing I wanted to kind of circle back to a point that Mike made earlier, which was, when it's in one direction, we seem to have all of the information overnight.
Yeah.
We have we know exactly their ideology. We've tracked down every social media post they made to this very obscure Russian blog with 0 views. But on these ones, it's just I don't know.
It's all Who
knows?
What I'm saying.
And if, in case you haven't heard, apparently we're also getting a bunch of information. I don't know if you guys heard about this last night. They're saying that someone rented a U-Haul.
Yes.
And crashed it into the White House gates.
Yeah, the Indian Nazi.
Yeah. And he had a Nazi flag in there too, because when I like to go commit my hate crimes, I make sure to carry all of my hate crime paraphernalia with me, just so the arresting officers know exactly what I was doing and why.
Yeah.
And fucking Sai Varshith Kandula. I promise I'm not casting a spell. That was the guy's name. Very white supremacist, very Aryan sounding name.
Yeah, very, very.
And I'm sure we're going to have all of the information by 24 hours from now on this guy. But we're still not going to have any idea what was in that manifesto. And we're still not going to have any fucking motivation for the Vegas shooter.
Yep, we still don't. And that's the thing. Like, look, I get it. Like, people are worried about copycats. I'm personally not, but what I am annoyed by is this selective approach to what we release and what we don't. I don't think that there's anything in that person's manifesto for this Tennessee shooting that could possibly justify what she did. There's nothing in there. So we may as well know what, like what her reasoning was. I mean, I don't care if she was bullied in school 10 years ago or whatever it was, or 5 years ago. Like, that doesn't justify this. So clearly she had problems probably before school. Like, I think that journalists should look into what her home life was like if they could. Maybe it's in the manifesto. Maybe, like, who knows? So
well, not every detail counts as a justification either.
Yes.
When you talk about the reasons why something happened, this is one of the things that pisses me off about feminists. You talk about how crime happens, and like one of the things that we've had to talk about is with rape perpetration, for instance. The data shows that there is a high rate of victimization as kids in the histories of perpetrators of sexual misconduct, sexual assault, sexual imposition, and sexual harassment, stalking, stuff like that. There's a high rate of having been victims as kids, and there's a high rate of female perpetration in that history against those kids. So feminists immediately get all up in arms and are like, "You're blaming women for getting raped." No, nobody said the victim was the perpetrator of that. What we're saying is, obviously, when this happens to a kid, you have to take into consideration that there's been some psychological damage that needs to be treated. And one of the many ways it can go is for the kid to stop recognizing other people's boundaries. You also have people that become poly victims, and there's a tendency among childhood victims that don't become perpetrators and don't necessarily get the best treatment after having been victimized to become poly victims, where they don't learn to communicate and enforce their own boundaries.
Yeah.
And so these are things that you talk about where you're not saying, all right, well, that means that the person is at fault for their own victimization. I mean, like that doesn't mean that. It means that when we know something bad like that has happened to a child, that as adults, if we want to prevent either of those two terrible outcomes from happening, our best chance at doing that is to take every measure we can to help the child rebuild what the perpetrator tore down in the process of grooming or physically assaulting. And that's tough. Like, it's tough to have those conversations. And it's the same thing with this shooter.
Yeah.
If you have somebody that was bullied, or if you have somebody that was sexually exploited by an educator or an administrator or somebody else in authority when she was a student, if either of those allegations were true, and we don't know if they were or not, like if that's true, and adults knew about it and there were complaints, and there must have been, because otherwise, like the rainbow cult would not know about it, then there should have been an effort to help redevelop the students' mental health. And the tools that normally you use for socialization that get broken down when it doesn't go well, when somebody does something awful to you, or when you don't connect with your fellow students and you get bullied. Like, it's the responsibility of the adults in the situation to help that young person through that situation and help them develop the social tools that they're going to need to process that and move on, and to socialize as an adult and not become violent or a serial victim.
There is another challenge here too. Let's say that in the manifesto, she goes into detail of like, or she expresses that she was bullied, assaulted, or even like molested and raped. There is a problem with that. First of all, we'd have to prove it, but more than that, we'd also have to consider like what do people of her generation consider to be violence and assault and all that. Is it just discomfort? Is it people disagreeing with her? Is it being dead named? Is it using the wrong pronouns? Because that's the stuff that really upsets people of that generation that are a part of that like Tumblr cult. And so to them, or at least they'll say that, you're basically killing me by by dead naming me or not using my preferred pronouns. And so this is justification for what I'm doing. And the problem is that it might not be worded in a way that allows us to really be able to parse that. And so it might just get reported as, oh yeah, she was assaulted. This school was totally like awful to her. And that's why she did that. And so we have to like understand that the language of the progressive, okay, is completely different from ours. And so like they use words that mean that to us mean something very extreme, and they use it every day. And this person, because young people are very prone to this, could have just swallowed all of it. So like the manifesto might not even be very useful to understand how they got to this point.
Well, actually, that would be useful in one way. It would prove that the language of the woke and the manner of thinking of the woke, the victim-y thinking of the woke, are causes of violence and need to be restrained and reformed.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you can see that. Well, that's what I'm saying, though. The problem is that how are we going to know? That's why even if she had said or made a bunch of claims, they would have to be looked into. We can't just be like, oh, I guess this school is terrible.
There's two ways to describe a thing. One of them is to just use buzzwords, and the other one is to actually go in depth in describing what happened.
Yeah.
Right. And if I was really going off the deep end and was gonna write a suicide note, because that's what it would be if I wouldn't go and hurt other people under any circumstance. But when I was suicidal, I would have been not using buzzwords. I was describing in my journal exactly, detail by detail, the things that I felt had affected my mind. And this is the other thing, right? When you've been through an experience of sexual victimization as a kid, you know that you have been screwed up. You don't understand it. You don't have a way of articulating it exactly, but you know that you've been stirred up wrong. I guess would be you've been scrambled like scrambled eggs in ways in your head, and you know it, and you don't have buzzwords for that. You have, I'm all mixed up because I always thought this, and then I was convinced of this, and then this happened, and so on. And you can give a whole ass description of being groomed. So I don't expect that it would be that difficult to tell. Like if you just see a bunch of buzzwords, then you know that what she's talking about, what she's been dealing with, is having the way that she thinks changed by this woke ideology.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a description of actions, physical actions that were taken against her, that's not woke ideology. That's abuse.
Maybe. We have to see.
Well, I mean, if she was a kid, it's abuse. So, like, there's no justification for that either.
No, of course not. But go ahead.
One last thing. I think it was this shooting. I'm pretty darn sure it was this shooting. They did kind of let one thing slip from either the planning or the manifesto or whatever very early. And I think that kind of gets rid of the, oh, it was something to do with the school narrative. That they made a point to say that this individual really did a lot of research trying to find the perfect place to hit and actually canceled. I don't know if it was an attempt or at the planning stages at that point, but actually canceled one of the shootings because they said, oh, they saw armed security at a place. And so this school wasn't even a first choice.
Right.
It was possibly a second or third, because again, what they said was they wanted to go after a place where they knew no one was going to fight back, where they knew they weren't going to face any resistance, and that they can get in and out easily, and that they were familiar with.
Well, that is one reason why they would target 9-year-olds.
Exactly.
That's what we were talking about the other week. Assigning an area of a parking lot for women only is like holding up a sign saying, "Come on in, rapists." Like a sign outside.
No one can fight back zone.
A gun-free zone outside a school is like saying, "Come on in, mass shooters."
Mm-hmm.
That's true, and of course that would be a church, right?
Depends
but look, we
on
gotta
the
move
church.
on. Thanks for that, Mike. I didn't know
is-
that. I guess we'll see tomorrow when the judge makes a ruling on whether or not they're going to release the manifesto and in what condition, like how much of it will be redacted or what have you. So
I have to say, I'll end this on a semi-humorous note. If this is in the interests of the parents, I have to say, if you let the manifesto go public and it reveals all the incriminating things that the woke media doesn't want the public to know about, then go ahead and do it and wait for the pundits at CNN and MSNBC, like Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper, to start screeching about how none of this is true. It's all a collusion. And you parents are all a bunch of crisis actors working for your own interest. Do you have any idea how much you can sue them for? At least according to precedent. And unlike Alex Jones, these cunts and the companies they work for can actually afford several $1 billion. And then when George Soros shoots them another $10 billion, you can rinse him for all his money as well. You could do so much good for the world, especially for the very American Christians you theoretically would like to protect. How much money are they paying you to bury this information? Because in theory, you could get so much more for unearthing it. That is, of course, assuming that the Rachel Maddows and Anderson Coopers of the world face the same legal consequences as the Alex Joneses of the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Sorry, maybe I am.
All right, let's move on to the next story. Let us know what you guys think about this one in the comments. And I look forward to seeing your thoughts because it is an interesting story. And we shouldn't forget it because the media would like us to. All right, well, anyway, speaking of the media, I'm going to mention this thing about January 6th. So the U.S. Department of Justice says that they have arrested over 1,000 Trump supporters. That's how CNBC.com is framing it, for the January 6th Capitol protest. As cited by CNBC, about 1/3 of Capitol riot defendants have been charged with assault, resisting arrest, impeding police, or something like that during the attack, and about 420 defendants have already been adjudicated and sentenced for their criminal activity, including like some people who are very old, like old women, for example. The Department of Justice's resolve to hold accountable those who committed crimes on January 6, 2021 has not and will not wane, the DOJ Updates said. FBI officials were concerned that footage from inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 would show undercover agents and confidential informants, a whistleblower said in testimony revealed on May 18th. He said Boston officials questioned why they couldn't get access to the tranche of some 11,000 hours of footage, because they have cameras everywhere, because it's the goddamn Capitol, from inside the Capitol. Because there may be UCs, which is undercover, officers, or confidential human sources on those videos whose identity we need to protect, according to Washington-based officials. And I bring this up because, well, first of all, we should not forget that there are people who are essentially just guilty of misdemeanors like trespassing that are being held for years. Okay, like years, and they're not. Nobody's hearing anything about it. Some of them are in solitary confinement. And you know, it's not being reported. It's not being discussed. People are being punished disproportionately. And you know, you guys remember Ash Scow, the journalist?
Yes.
Yeah.
That she used to write about college rape cases, false allegations mostly, right? And since those days, and she was also involved with Gamergate. And since those days, Ash has, you know, gotten married, had kids, and she's moved to North Carolina. And I spoke to her on Facebook because she and I are still friends, and I chat with her sometimes because I like to, you know, see what's going on. And she currently writes for the Washington Examiner, the Daily Wire, and probably some other stuff. And I asked her about this, and she told me that from what she knows, like, none of this stuff that's happening, she thinks it's absolutely absurd that people are being treated this way for trespassing, and they're being called or labeled as enemies of the state. And so I think that I just wanted to mention this story briefly. I know the photograph that I have here displayed is kind of, well, how do I put it? It's intended to make bias your view on this. But remember, there were feds there, and there was only one death, and the person who was killed was one of the protesters that was unfortunately climbing in through a window that, like, Epps, I think, broke. I just wanted to remind everybody what you know, like, the scale of this.
There was only one death that was actually at the site.
Yeah,
there
it
were
was
a few
Ashley
deaths
Babbitt
in the periphery.
Yeah,
like
there was only one murder, shall we say?
Yeah, there was
That's
one
what I was
person
gonna
that
say,
was killed by another person. Yeah,
And there was only one death that was caused by the event.
yeah,
Everything that they labeled caused by the event, like they claimed the protesters killed people, that was disproved.
well, yeah, it was a lie.
Right.
Like, I mean, like, most of what
they
was reported
might
is
be
a
able
lie.
to say, yeah, they might be able to say that suicides were caused by the event, but I wouldn't say that's on the protesters.
Yeah, the
'cause
cop
those were officers that might feel guilty about how they handled the situation.
Yeah, and the cop
You
that
know,
killed Ashley Babbitt was not charged, was not prosecuted.
He wasn't
nothing.
a cop. He was
security.
Secret Service.
Yeah, whoever, the guy.
And he was also a tremendous fuck up.
Yeah.
He had to be disciplined, I think, more than once for leaving his service weapon in a public bathroom.
Oh,
Oops.
shit.
So
Public
anyway, I don't know if you guys have any
bad.
thoughts on this, but I just wanted to, like, you know, remind
Well,
everyone
I mean,
about this.
If you want people to really take you seriously, if you really want to bolster your credibility with the public, the most important thing for you to do is to heavy-handedly, and I mean, like, absolutely heavy-handedly, punish anybody that doesn't believe you, because that just totally makes people trust. You know, they've obviously, if they're going to get severely punished for demonstrating a lack of trust in you and communicating their dissatisfaction with your handling of their questions about your actions and how a particular event was run that affects their lives. The most important way to communicate to them that you are an upstanding and trustworthy and believable, credible person or entity is to severely punish anybody that questions you in any way, shape, or form, even just by coming to visit to ask more questions. That just is the best trust building exercise. You don't want to show transparency. You don't want to open up for more questions. You don't want to meet with people and discuss the situation with them. And you certainly don't want to open an investigation into what they're questioning. Nope, just punish the shit out of them. And then everybody that is affected by your decision making will trust you from there on out. They'll know that you're absolutely being honest and forthright with them.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'm sensing a little bit of sarcasm in your voice. I don't know if like that's something
might
you
be the
intended,
case.
but
Maybe.
So for everyone across the media and across the internet who on the afternoon of January the 6th was watching all of this and rabidly calling for the mass punishment of those protesters to the full extent of the law.
yeah.
The question is, are you satisfied? Is that enough to satiate your appetite for retribution? Those 1,000 or so people. Is that enough? Let's leave aside how that global cult of racial Marxists took siege on our cities all over the world, not just in America, but all over the world, just months before. Let's forget for now how, to you, it was just inconceivable authoritarianism for anyone to even suggest that those rioters should have been punished. They weren't, by the way, for the most part. Even those who were taken into custody were posted bail from some mysterious source or other. As has always been the case, every time Antifa and BLM do this, an option that has not been even extended to these Trump supporters, I realize that to you folks, the satisfactory number of communist terrorists getting detained would be exactly zero, but it's worth asking, what is the satisfactory number of protesters against your oikophobic regime to be detained for 2.5 years and counting? Is 1,000 or so enough? Can you now put down the pitchfork and dismount from your high horse and say, yes, that's enough? That's just about the Goldilocks amount of blood for which I was lusting. I am sufficiently satisfied. You may now put down the machine and get back to arresting the violent criminals who are planning on doing mass killings. You know, the ones already known to the FBI. I guess not. Weird. And yeah, no, something tells me it's still not enough. 1,000 Trump supporters is nothing. It still leaves 70-something million fascist heathen infidels that you still want off the streets and punished forever for their heresy. And even that will not be enough. From then on, you'll focus your crosshairs on anyone who attends the 2 minutes of hate and doesn't scream quite loud enough at the ghost of Emmanuel Goldstein.
Yeah.
I realize none of the people I'm talking to are even listening to me or to Honey Badger Radio ever. We're quite high up on your list of enemies of the state. I guess all I'm doing is expressing my own particular 2 minutes, but you'll notice I'm directing it at the ruling regime, and I always will. Till my dying breath, as soon or as late as that might be.
I just want to say one last thing about this. And I've said this before, but I was almost there. Like the day of January 6th. I
advised you against it. I strongly advised you
I know, and
against
my wife did too. She begged me not to go, and I was like, I'm only 3 hours away from DC. I was gonna go because all I wanted to do was interview people and like get their opinions on things and maybe like plug the channel, right? Like hopefully, because I've noticed that the same kind of people that are Trump supporters tend to also be sympathetic to men's issues. So I was like, well, this could be an opportunity, and I would put out some video and all that. And I didn't end up going because Rana Cam and other people and Lindsay especially, she was like, please don't go because if something happens to you, she'd be screwed basically.
You'd be in prison to this day.
I would, because the thing is that even if this is what I want to point out, okay, even the people who didn't go inside got arrested. Even people who were on the periphery, who were just watching, or maybe they were some people that like I think Tim Pool like got a phone. He wasn't even there. Okay, so it doesn't like people will say, well, some people are breaking the law or whatever. Misdemeanors at best. Like misdemeanors at best. And the people who were doing stuff like Epps, for example, who is a Fed, let's just face it, like, he was a Fed. He's obviously not going to serve like anything, like nothing's going to happen. So if I had gone, there's a pretty good chance that I would not be hosting this show even now, even though it's been a couple of years. So yeah, I mean, I guess I count my blessings, but that's one of the reasons why I'm watching this story, because I'm looking at what almost happened to me. You
When
know?
there's some other things that people should be aware of with regard to that as well. Like, not only would you not have to have engaged in any crime to be accused and convicted of a crime in this instance, they have that they've already been caught lying in people's cases. They've already been caught where it's been alleged that the individual did a bunch of things on their own, and then it comes out that actually it was a Fed basically directed them. And this is not a one-off either. There have, over the last 10 years, been several news articles come out where, you know, this person or that person gets arrested for and convicted of planning a terrorist act, and then you find out, well, actually this person was along for the ride while the feds were planning for them to commit a terrorist act and providing all the materials. And like, even I can't remember what all mental health conditions the kid had, but one of them was autism, if I remember right. I think schizophrenia. They basically contacted the least capable person they could find of vetting information that was coming into him, because he was discontented about some things that they didn't want him to be discontinued, people to be discontented over, and talked him into, radicalized him, to use their language, talked him into committing violence, provided a vehicle, provided the ability to go get the materials and everything. And his parents had to come out and say, he never would have been capable of doing this, like, much less come up with the idea. He physically and mentally could not have achieved any of this if it hadn't been for FBI informants contacting him, planning it for him, buying the equipment for him, transporting him, and then the state was going to hold him responsible for all of that. Now, if that had involved drugs or prostitution, and a local precinct had done all of that to somebody and then arrested them for drug dealing or engaging in one side or the other of prostitution, that would be labeled entrapment. They would not have a case against that person, and they would be disciplined for it. But since it's the feds, since it is the federal police, the FBI, that's a different story, And for me, this is a particularly sad thing because, like my great grandfather was a Secret Service officer. Back when the Secret Service was about preventing the president from getting murdered, and the CIA was about murdering the president. And it's just sad. It's sad to see what should have been our country's immune system against crime and against infiltration by foreign interests trying to interfere with our political system become the vehicle for protecting our country's system against vigilance.
Yeah.
Against, not necessarily vigilantism, but transparency, against vetting of the character of the people involved, against vetting the process itself. Like, it's every from the top down, every agency that we are told that we should trust to protect the citizens against having our country taken over by nut jobs and malevolent interests, are protecting the nut jobs and malevolent interests at the expense of the civil rights of the people.
Yep.
It's completely upside down.
Yeah.
We might
of
as well
course.
not have a law enforcement force. We might as well not have a national security organization, because it is doing exactly the opposite
Yeah,
of
well,
what we are told it should be doing. We
it's
should
gotta,
start calling it national insecurity.
yeah, it's got to change. But we got to
I
move
find
on.
I find
Because
myself
yeah,
asking if which is it with the FBI? Are they perpetrating these things? Is it merely just as banal as they need to justify their salaries and the money they get paid by the government, and that's where it stops? Or do they do these things not only for that reason, but to start, sowing certain seeds that they want to sow? Like, yeah, you got to be really scared about those white supremacists. I mean, haven't you heard they're the biggest threat to national security? Look at
yeah,
all these things we've perpetrated.
yeah. And
And
white supremacists are very diverse these days. They come in all
oh
kinds of
yeah,
other
yeah.
races.
Well, don't you know the only rule of racism club is just be racist? That's the only rule.
Yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead.
the other thing too is that, and this is the thing I've really found that a lot of people don't know about January the 6th, is that there were two protests. The White House isn't this small place. It's very, very big.
Yeah.
It's
So
almost
you
like
had
a small town.
It is. It is. And you had two protests. The one where they simply walked through, maybe participated in some light tomfoolery that I would go as far as to call vandalism. And then there was the one where it was considerably more raucous, where there were people injured, there were cops injured. And yeah, I think a few of those arrests are definitely justified. Although, had this happened in New York, they would have called it a slow day.
Yeah, it would have been fiery but mostly peaceful. Or like the other
Exactly.
time that BLM attacked the Capitol prior, and it was
Yeah.
far more
Where
destructive.
something over 200 Secret Service agents were injured
Yeah.
and no arrests of note were made.
Nope.
And that really exposes what I'm trying to get at, which is this two-tiered justice system.
Yep. Exactly.
We've had another great example of that recently. Without getting too much into it, I don't know if you guys recall the story we did several months ago of the teenager Trump supporter who got into an argument with a grown-ass man who was drunk, who then proceeded to leave the area, get into his truck, stalk the kid, and then run him dead in the street like a dog.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that story.
And they've just now got the plea down to manslaughter,
Yeah.
even though there was a clear, demonstrable previous interaction, which makes this premeditated.
Mm-hmm.
Even though
Yep.
the guy was on the phone with his mother saying, "Mom, can you come pick me up? I think I'm being followed by someone."
Yeah. Yep.
And then the guy's defense, oh my goodness, the most disgraceful part, the guy's defense when he immediately came in was like, "I can't really go to jail. I've got a business to run. I'm a really busy, important guy. Can we just get on with this?"
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I said, we're just gonna bump that down to manslaughter.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be really interesting to see if I don't want to jinx anything, but if we get someone with common sense in the White House next, it's going to be interesting to see if we're going to have a repeat of 2017,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to see how quick that gets swept under the carpet, how that
Yeah.
gets just memory hold,
Yeah.
because exactly.
I guess it's going to depend on who gets in, whether it's somebody who was, at least in government at that time and had to deal with that stuff, or whether you get somebody that's basically a noob that could forget that kind of thing. I imagine, I hope at least that if he were to get elected, Trump wouldn't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah.
And I hope, because he was governor through um, through protests and other misconduct, and has dealt with some of the craziness from the woke left, that
Mm-hmm.
if Ron DeSantis gets elected, that he would not forget that stuff, and that he would not make the same mistakes that Trump made during that time. Like
Mm-hmm.
you obviously, you can't, if you're going to be big government about some things, you have to be big government about that. And if you're going to be small government, you got to not lock people down and suddenly become big government because there's a 95% survivable deadly virus out there that,
Yeah.
like that's the other thing. Like January 6th, I watched all of this stuff happen from the bedroom my son had just moved out of a year earlier, where I was quarantined because I was dying. I wasn't even, like, I was infected, but I wasn't sick, if that makes sense. Like, I had the minimum quarantine because they don't make you quarantine longer if you don't have symptoms.
Right.
But yeah, it's just, if somebody started selling "I survived COVID" T-shirts, I think most of the country would have them, and that's
Of course.
what was going on at the time. And all of the measures that were taken, and all of the craziness that happened during 2020, like, how soon are people going to forget that? Right?
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully they
You know,
never do, but it all depends on how thoroughly they've been propagandized about
there
all
was
that.
a
Like, it was-
great article that came out that said we are going to forget most of what happened during the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good thing.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah, of course, it's a
Please-
good thing
please
because it
do.
allows
They-
it to
but
happen again, right?
They desperately don't want people to remember. They desperately don't want to be held
Yeah.
accountable.
Of course. But okay, look, I gotta move on. We got 2 more stories, maybe 3 if we can get to it quickly enough, which I don't see that happening. But please send us a super chow. I'm not getting any right now, but please leave us your comments in a super chat, or you can send us some support through feedthebadger.com/support, or you can just go to feedthebadger.com and there will be links right on the main page. It'll take you to where you can send us super chows or donate to our fundraiser, or both. So with that said, we're going to move on to the next story. Just a quick little follow-up on the founder of Cashapp, right? Bob Lee. So I just think this was kind of a weird, thing that we learned, because we covered this story when it broke originally. We didn't know much about what had happened, but we have a little bit more info. So Mike J, take it away.
So the tech world was rocked nearly 2 months ago when software engineer, businessman, and Cashapp founder Bob Lee was stabbed to death in his home city of San Francisco. Many were quick to blame the city's rising rate of random violent crime, but Lee's stabbing appears to be targeted. Just a word of warning, we're going to be using the word allegedly a lot, so get prepared for that, because the case is still developing.
Mm-hmm.
The prime suspect in the killing of Lee is a fellow tech worker by the name of Nima Momeni of, I believe the guy was Pakistani, I want to say.
Iranian.
I always mix those two up. According to CCTV footage and eyewitnesses, it's likely that Momeni was the last person to have interacted with Lee prior to his death. The two allegedly had an argument about Momeni's sister, who was reportedly in a casual relationship with Lee. Momeni was interested to learn if Lee was doing anything inappropriate with her. I don't have any more context for what that means. I don't know whether it means drugs or sex or what. And apparently Lee was quite fond of both.
Yes.
Even at the time of death, they noted that he was on a pharmacy's worth of chemicals. So they allegedly had this argument, and it's unclear how it ended, But it couldn't have been that bad because Lee entered Momenny's car and the two drove off around 2 a.m. into a dark alley near the 300 block of Main Street in the Rincon Hill neighborhood of San Francisco. And again, what happens next isn't super clear because there were no witnesses and there was no CCTV footage of exactly what was happening in there. But one moment later, Momenny appears and quickly drives off. And then the next, Lee emerges from the alley, stumbling and bleeding. And by the time onlookers were able to call 911, Lee was already unconscious by the time the cops got there. And by the time they got him to the hospital, he was pronounced dead after succumbing to stab wounds to his lungs and heart. So someone got him good.
Do you know how long it was before the cops, like between when they called and when the cops showed up? How much time it passed?
I do not know.
Okay. I'm just curious because if this is California, they probably defunded the police. So.
Well, there is one thing: stab wounds can kill really fast.
Yeah,
like
especially in the lungs and heart.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of blood vessels, and essentially drowning. Yeah, if you don't end up with cardiac arrest.
Okay, but go ahead, Mike.
Wait till you hear the excuse. This is brilliant. I used that word quite wrongly, but go on.
So, as I said, Lee would be pronounced dead after succumbing to the stab wounds to his lungs and heart. The motive for Momenny's alleged stabbing of Lee's unclear. Aside from Lee allegedly dating Momenny's sister, he also dated Momenny's ex-girlfriend 3 years ago. Days later, Momenny was arrested and charged with murder for Lee's killing. He's officially entered a plea of not guilty, with his lawyer, somewhat interestingly, arguing the stabbing was a combination of accident and self-defense.
A combination of accident and self-defense. You didn't mean to stand your ground. But you tripped and fell and accidentally defended yourself in a man's lungs and heart. I mean, it sounds like the daftest thing anyone's ever said. But really, it's just a concise distillation of the argument along the lines of, it didn't happen, but if it did, it was a good thing. And that certainly wouldn't be the first time we've heard that particular logical fallacy. We've heard it so many times that it deserves its own Latin name. Non est iter, si iter est bonum est, for anyone who's wondering, or something like that. So what are we going to do about this dire situation, eh? Well, it's time to ban knives, America. That's the only way. That's the only way we could have possibly prevented this. Normally, we would ban guns first, and then ban knives, and then ban potato peelers and cheese graters, and so on. But we can make a special case for the good old US of A. You have yourselves that Second Amendment. But as we know, that was only ever about muskets and what have you. After all, for a militia to be well armed doesn't mean standing around with daggers and hunting knives, does it? So we'll go ahead and confiscate your knives, and you can find a way of using guns to spread your peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Oh, sounds like fun, if nothing else.
I could see if you were in a fight with somebody and you were both high or drunk, and stumbling around, a single stab wound being an accident where, somebody falls onto the knife or you fall into the other person. But a targeted set of stab wounds being an accident is a lot harder to explain. And it's not that easy to stab someone in the heart. Your body has a natural armor in front of your heart. It's called your sternum. And you have to pierce that on purpose or get in between the ribs. And that's pretty hard to predict. So getting somebody in the heart and the lungs, like, you almost have to have a specific effort going toward that.
Yeah. Or
you have to be on the ground defending yourself against somebody that's attacking you from above so that you're stabbing up into them. And again, I can see one stab wound being an accident in that circumstance if they fall on you. But it's awfully hard to argue that a second stab wound was an accident. So unless there was only one wound that went through both the lung and the heart, I'm a little skeptical
There
about the
was,
accident.
they said, the coroner said there were exactly 3 stab wounds.
Say if there was 3 stab wounds, I'm really skeptical of calling that an accident.
Yeah,
honestly.
that's going to be
Now,
a tough sell.
Self-defense is a distinct possibility, and they're like, my jury's going to be out until there's more information on that. But
I thought that
I'm really skeptical of the accident claim.
So this guy, Bob Lee, so he was banging this dude's sister and his ex-girlfriend 3 years earlier, right? I thought that he and he's like, he basically was in the scene, as it were. For some reason, I thought he was like part of, or he would attend some kind of like sex parties.
Bob Lee, this guy was definitely known to be in the sort of underground clubbing, rave, drugging, swinging scene.
Yeah.
If you were going to get mad about that, though, and like engage in violence because of it, why would you wait 3 years?
Well, I don't know. Maybe he wasn't bothered by it, and then well, here's the thing. I don't know that it has anything to do with like this guy's relations. It might be something else. Originally I thought maybe it's a business thing because they kind of work in the same circle.
Like,
but
there's no corroboration I found that they knew each other previously to this.
Yeah.
The only link is this, ex-girlfriend several years ago.
And the sister.
And the sister. And like I said, it was, they appeared to have some sort of conversation, some phrase it as an argument concerning the guy's sister. And maybe he had knowledge that this guy was into a bunch of weird sex stuff and drug use and partying, and didn't want that for his sister.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all speculation at this point.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, like I said,
their motive in relationship is just completely unknown.
Well, I guess what I think that might be a takeaway is that, like, his lifestyle seemed to me to be pretty like high risk. Not just because of the stabbing, but just like, the sex parties, the drugs, the orgies, the dating, whoever. Like, and I thought maybe I'm wrong, but I thought he had children or something. Mm-hmm.
But the guy that was stabbed, Bob Lee, had children with his ex-wife. I believe they separated at least a year ago, and I forget who got custody. I think she did.
Yeah.
And
so they were married when he was dating the sister.
Could be the sister or the ex-girlfriend.
It's unknown. It's unknown.
Yeah, we don't know.
But I mean, like, if it was just a year versus 3 years, unless his marriage was really short-lived, which is a possibility that happens. But geez, I guess one takeaway from this is the issue of proxy violence is pretty serious. And if this was a conflict over the sister or the ex or both, and it wasn't self-defense and it wasn't an accident, it wouldn't have happened without that conflict, right?
Yeah.
And if it was self-defense, then you have the question of, did a brother confront his sister's ex over something inappropriate, something awful or whatever, and the ex was such a messed up guy that he attacked instead of just ending the conversation and walking away, and fought so hard that the brother felt obligated or so scared that he had to defend himself and with deadly force. In which case, what was she doing with that kind of guy to begin with?
Yep.
When it's difficult to really speculate on this because we don't know enough details. But if the situation was something like that, it goes right back to, if women are going to expect and demand proxy violence from men, and women do that as en masse Like every time somebody, oh, where were all the men when some woman has been in distress, right? If they're going to do that,
Yeah.
then it's on women to be very careful stewards of that proxy violence and to not put themselves in situations where they're borrowing trouble on his dime. And,
Yep.
Frankly, I don't think men owe women that proxy violence. I think that is a form of slavery. I don't think I could have made it any clearer than I did in the video I made in response to that country song that I hate so much. But this is just, if this is what it looks like just from the scant information that we have, if it's what it looks like it could be, then
It
you
could
can take
be.
a lesson from it.
It could
Don't,
be. Yeah.
Don't
Maybe he upset the
feel
sister.
obligated.
Yeah.
Don't feel obligated to confront, especially like from a 3-year-old breakup. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but if you guys have been separated for 3 years, don't go ladies, don't go asking a guy to go track down that asshole for you. If there's a problem 3 years later because you're being stalked, go to the police, not your brother
Mm-hmm.
or your best buddy or any of that shit, because you're going to get somebody killed and somebody jailed. Right? And if and the cops are paid to be your proxy violence. But if there's not a problem, then leave him the fuck alone and move on, because
Yeah.
you're going to get somebody killed and somebody jailed. Like,
Yep.
have some common sense. And guys, don't put up with that shit. It's not your job. You don't have to do that.
No, of course not. So we're gonna move on.
One thing I'd
go
like
ahead,
to
Mike.
mention real quick.
Yeah.
I just want to move away from Bob Lee, the founder of Cashapp, for one moment. And I want to talk about something completely random. The FedNow service is going to be launching next month. And that's going to be instant payments through the Federal Reserve from person to person. And that's going to be something that's going to be happening soon. And it's great that, maybe one of their biggest competitors is not doing so hot because they just lost their CEO.
Well, I mean, I think the
many
app
people
is
say
still
that
up
this
and
is
running.
going to be a building block towards the central bank digital currency.
Yay.
But, that's
not
just
saying it's
completely
related or
ramming.
anything,
I'm
just
sorry I
kinda-
brought it up. I don't want to distract anybody from it. Let's get back to it, Brian. Sorry.
Very interesting news.
Yeah, it is. All right, we got to move on. Let us know what you guys think about this in the comments. We're going to move on to the last story. There could be one more depending on, how we do. But we're going to get into the last story. We're going to talk about women's depression. So, a new Gallup survey reveals depression rates have skyrocketed for American adults. Of course, the article frames it as especially women. Almost 30% of adults report being diagnosed with depression at some point in their lifetime, nearly 10 percentage points higher than it was in 2015. The rates of depression are rising fastest in women. Over 1/3 of women are now report of being diagnosed with depression. Depression rates are also climbing amongst Black and Hispanic adults, according to Gallup, now surpassing white respondents. While clinical depression was slowly rising in the US, it seems to have jumped notably in the aftermath of, guess what? The COOF and the lockdowns that followed. What? What was that?
I'm expressing my shock through
Surprise.
a
Surprise.
You can't see it, but
yeah, no, but I can feel it. Currently, 17% of U.S. adults report experiencing significant loneliness yesterday, projecting to an estimated 44 million people. According to Gallup, quote, women have historically reported substantially higher levels of depression than men, end quote, and that COVID impacted women worse. women worse, guys. Did you know? The COOF affects women more. They claim women were disproportionately likely to lose their jobs or to exit the workforce altogether, due in part to the pandemic driving children home from school or daycare. And that because women make up 78% of workers in healthcare, they were exposed to enhanced emotional and psychological risk. While the Gallup survey focuses on the fastest growing rates of self-reported depression diagnosis, the rate of suicide is still highest in middle-aged white men. In 2020, men died by suicide 3.88 times more than women, and white men accounted for 69.68% of suicide
Yeah.
deaths.
I can't say it. Can't say it.
Yeah, no, I don't buy this idea that women suffer from depression more than men, and nor should anyone else. The tricky thing about depression as a term or as a concept connected to such a term, it's similar to the tricky thing about gender dysphoria. It does exist as a clinical condition. Problem is, it's very easy to misdiagnose in others. It's very easy to misdiagnose in oneself, and it's very easy to simply feign or just straight up fake, for attention as an excuse for just not dealing with your shit, or just because it's the trendy fake disease to have in this day and age. A compounding problem with the term depression is it's ambiguous. It is something listed in the DSM as a medical condition brought on by, among other things, a chemical imbalance. But exactly the same term refers to an ordinary human condition. Lots of other things. Narcissism has similar ambiguities. Some people are pathologically narcissistic, like they can't help doing it no matter what happens. But some people can be called narcissists sort of colloquially, but all they are is self-centered cunts who will snap out of it as soon as they get a harsh reality check. But depression is even more ambiguous than that. It doesn't just refer to an ordinary human condition. It refers to an ordinary human emotion as an ordinary reaction to one's current circumstances. Getting depressed in 2020, particularly in the late stages of 2020, is, I put it to you, not necessarily a medical condition. It's a perfectly normal reaction to a world that's gone completely insane and has locked you in your home, locked you out of your job, locked your own small business out of reality, all for extremely spurious reasons, and then held your life hostage over a medical procedure that evidently does nothing to fix anything. If you ask me, if anything, it's neurologically abnormal not to get at least a little bit depressed over a situation like that. There's that quote that's so often worth repeating. Before you diagnose yourself with depression or low self-esteem, first make sure you are not, in fact, simply surrounded by assholes. How can anyone have looked around themselves in the last 3 years and not concluded or at least considered that they are surrounded by assholes? To say the very least. Like on a global scale.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, yes, it stands to reason that anyone who was perhaps on the brink of actual clinical depression was highly likely to have been pushed over the edge by the events of the last 3 years, which is to say nothing of the physical health conditions they've been mysteriously facing since the last 2 years. Obviously, those people need help, and that help needs to come from the petty tyrants who tormented them with this ruthless Big Brother future. I'm just saying, it's quite probable that the condition most of these people are suffering is not a condition that should be diagnosed by a doctor or even a psychologist. It's a condition that anyone in their right mind would experience. No doctor should be diagnosing anyone with acute fear or chronic guilt, because these are not medical conditions. They're normal emotions, and you should be primarily looking to yourself for solace in such a situation. You should be looking to your friends and family and loved ones for solace in such a condition. You certainly shouldn't be getting pop psychological advice from the very same quacks who pumped you full of experimental poison for no good reason. And yet, to some degree, my recommendation is the same or similar as, some randomer on the internet whose username is Doctor. If you found yourself racked with acute fear in 2020, and you need someone else to blame, then your compensation should also come from the petty, lying tyrants who tormented you. Because they did. They tormented all of us. And if any of those lying tyrants in question ever truly realize what they've done, and they find themselves experiencing chronic guilt, well, you deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
You deserve to suffer that ordinary human emotion for the rest of your lives. It's the least you can suffer, given that millions of poor cunts with shite for blood are suffering, genuinely, biologically suffering for the rest of their lives because of you. And if that makes you depressed, fuck you, you deserve that too.
My skepticism in regard to the difference in depression between men and women, it comes from some personal experience in healthcare and some personal experience as a patient. And there's a phenomenon, and it's women are natural hypochondriacs. And if you aren't a natural hypochondriac as a woman, it's okay. Your friends and female family members will just extend their hypochondria to you. Women have a tendency to pathologize everything. Everything's a mental illness. Everything's a cold. Everything's a injury. Everything's, 1,000 times bigger than it really is. So I got diagnosed with depression when I was in high school, and I had situational depression. I had symptoms of situational depression, but it was really more a situation that I hadn't talked about enough for anybody to treat it and anybody to help me through it. So I get diagnosed with clinical chemical imbalance-based depression and drugged. And of course that fucked me up, and they threw more drugs at me, and they never consider the possibility that maybe the patient isn't presenting symptoms accurately in mental health care. They just keep throwing more drugs at you. And the thing that women will do is, oh, okay, you give me another drug, I'll take that. You give me another drug, I'll take that. And it took getting to the point of like being the old lady that swallowed the fly of medicine for me, and having a laundry list of side effects and damage from drug interactions, some of which led to permanent physical changes. Before I was like, no, wait a minute, like they're just throwing darts at a dartboard here. I'm not actually getting medical treatment. Women will do that, right? Men will suffer in silence. Men will not trust because they see this shit happening. And why would you trust a system that does that?
Yeah, I mean, why would men trust a system that treats them like women that are dysfunctional?
And honestly, like most of the dysfunction that the system is treating with women is put on. It's not that women don't have mental health conditions. It's that quite frequently, like women go in there with an idea of, well, it's this or it's that, and they get the diagnosis they want, and boom, they're getting drugs, and it's supposed to all be fixed, and then they get mad when it's not fixed. So there are men who are going through situational or chemical imbalance-based depression that are not getting treated. This is why suicide among men is so much higher. When they do go in for treatment, they're not getting treated as men. They're getting treated as women, and they're not being taken seriously, or they're being told that their problem has a different cause than it really has. You're not allowed to be depressed about being separated from your children and being left by your wife. That's boundary issues. That's toxic masculinity. You can't have that, right? That doesn't make you not suicidal. So I with this being self-reported and everything, I think a lot of men are less likely to tell a survey that they deserve a diagnosis or have a diagnosis because they haven't reported it to a doctor, or they don't believe in it, or they don't trust the diagnosis. Whereas a lot of women are going to be like, oh yes, I'm so stressed. I have to,
or men just don't
closed my
like.
favorite coffee shop and I had to drive an extra 10 minutes to get to another one to get my what is it, pumpkin spice double latte with fat-free coconut milk
Soy
or
milk,
whatever. Oh yeah. And that's the same level of women will treat that like it's the same level of pain and suffering as the guy that is separated from his children and has been left by his wife. And their doctor will as well, and they'll report it to this survey. So I just have a lot of skepticism in regard to the actual rates of depression and everything. And I also want to say something about the healthcare thing. Notice, you got to pay attention to this, the wording, all right? And the women make up 78% of workers in healthcare. Well, guys, I'm in healthcare. I got 3 weeks of training for my job. That's it. There's no college education. There's no degree. My certification takes 3 weeks of education. I have to re-up my CPR training and my MedPass certification annually. That's an 8-hour class for each of those things, right? That's it. 16 hours of training a year, and I qualify to do my job. All right. I'm not a doctor, right? Not a nurse, not even a licensed practical nurse. That's 18 months of university training. Okay. My exposure was to people who were not allowed in Ohio. People with intellectual disabilities were pretty much put in lockdown. They weren't allowed to go anywhere. Their day programs were shut down, right? They weren't allowed to go to any gatherings. Rules that didn't apply to everybody else applied to them. And it was mandated that they would be vaccinated, right? So that was actually a ruling that was made by, or not a ruling, but a executive order from our governor's office. So there was if they're going to claim that there was any emotional and psychological risk there, because they didn't say they were exposed to infectious disease risk, right? Emotional and psychological risk.
Yeah.
Because the overwhelming majority of women in healthcare are nurses' aides and direct support professionals, right? Then there are licensed practical nurses and nurses. And the higher you climb on the ladder of healthcare, the more you get to where men go when they go into healthcare. When men go into healthcare, they go into the most proactive elements they can, or the most lucrative elements they can, or both. Right? Infectious disease specialists were more likely to be men. Men do the dirty jobs even in medical care. A gastroenterologist is almost exclusively likely to be a man.
Yeah.
Right? That's a shitty job. Just saying. But yeah, that's the guy that sticks the camera up your ass if they think you might have colon cancer. Just so you know. But yeah, it's again claiming that women are more likely to be depressed, claiming that women are in a more stressful position. It's all bullshit. You watch the language that is being used to describe this. It's buzzwords, not specificity. And remember that this is self-reported.
Yep.
And women are more likely to feel comfortable complaining, and they are more likely to be taken seriously when they complain. And then they're also more likely to receive a diagnosis and treatment as a result of that. It doesn't mean women are more likely to be depressed. And the difference in suicide rate demonstrates that very clearly.
Yes. Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this about depression? Okay, then I'm gonna go ahead and make this sausage a little extra long because I want to mention the last thing that I found. So, let's move on to the next story. Guess who's back? Back again. Zoe's back. Tell a friend. So IDW which is a comic publisher. They used to be, they used to print the Image comics, and I think now IDW and Image, and they've split off and done other things. They have hired Zoe Quinn to write a Wednesday Addams comic.
Who?
Oh, this is gonna be bad.
Zoe
No,
Quinn.
who? Literally who?
Oh yeah, yeah, literally who?
Literally
Yeah,
ZQ.
literally Hugh.
She is writing. So you guys might have seen it, might not. There was a couple. I think there were two, but I could be wrong. Of Addams Family like animated films that came out recently. They were like 3D animated and made to look more like the original strip that they were based on. And she is writing a story about Wednesday specifically because, of course, and they have a sort of a synopsis of the first issue called, it's Addams Family Bodies issue number 1. And I just want to give you guys the synopsis of this. And this is Zoe Quinn's idea. So Wednesday Addams doesn't feel like she fits in anywhere. Not even at home, after she discovers a beauty magazine in her Uncle Fester's room that tells her all about how she should look and act. It doesn't keep her down for long, however, as she quickly realizes that rather than change herself, it would be more fun to make over her family and force them to accept the societal norms they all normally reject. Reprinting the IDW one-shot, this spin-off from the Addams Family movie features all your favorite characters, including Gomez, Morticia, Pugsley, Lurch, the Thing, or Thing, not the Thing, and of course Wednesday, featuring a new macabre cover by China Cloakson Flores. This kicks off a whole new run of comics featuring the creepy, kooky, altogether spooky Addams Family. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
It's funny how they accuse us of wanting to live in the 50s. You'll recall the Addams Family was first devised, I don't know if it was the 50s or the 60s, but the original Addams Family show was devised in the 50s, back in the days when goths weren't a thing.
Yeah.
When there wasn't a clique in every high school of goths that you could easily belong to if you feel like being a goth. Like you can't in this day and age say, "Oh, I'm a goth. There's no one I can befriend. There's no small community of like-minded people who dress exactly the fucking same as me and think exactly the same as me in every high school, in every community in the Western world."
Yeah.
Like, and no, you're living in the 50s where you have no one to talk to when you clearly do. Not that Zoe Quinn's even a fucking goth.
Right.
She's a blue-haired fucking narcissist, and she has a considerable community of people to talk to. I mean, are any goths going to complain about cultural appropriation here? No.
That's not what real goths do. And I will say, if you are under 30, maybe even under 40, and your parents aren't goth, you aren't either.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing as a young goth. There are young emos, but there are no young goths. You don't have the conditions to be goth.
Well, none of us have sacked Rome in the 5th century.
Not that goth, but 80s goth, that was a totally different
You
thing.
have to be visibly goth, a Visigoth, if you will.
There you go.
Ah,
But no, those conditions haven't existed. But those conditions, the conditions under which people got labeled goth for wearing dark clothes and listening to increasingly depressing death metal and smoking pot and talking about how dark the world was getting. And by the way, being right. Yeah, those conditions are gone, and they're never coming back. So get over it, move on, start your own damn clique. Start your own counterculture. Right? There are also no hippies like under the age of 60. If you're under 60 years old and you call yourself a hippie, you are full of shit.
Well, I think the thing is that Zoe's not trying to sell herself off as a goth. I think that this
No,
is
she's
like
just
what
trying to.
feminists always do. They take something established, they co-opt it, and they turn
Yeah.
it into something completely different. Like she's wearing the skin of Wednesday.
Yes.
And
It's
and
the
the thing
progressive
is
skin
too is
suit,
that
as
That's
Sargon
it. Feminists are skinwalkers.
yeah, they are. And the thing is, this is really important, at least to me, as a person who is interested in the arts and creativity. Nothing in that synopsis reflects Wednesday Addams or the Addams family. Like, if you have actually read the strip, so it originally was a comic strip, okay, that had these, 3, 4 panels to tell a quick little joke, and that was the end of it. So there was no plot. It did not develop. The characters didn't change. They didn't get older. Nothing like that. It was supposed to be gags, and that's it, right? It was based in something kind of macabre, but it always like walked that
all
line
slapstick.
of,
Yeah.
like there was always implied things, but never like outright, stated things. And then the movies they carried the same spirit, and the television show from the 60s carried the same spirit into it. And what Zoe's doing is she's taking a character, Wednesday, which, by the way, before Christina Ricci played her, really didn't do much. Like if she was like the least important character in the family originally. But whatever, Christina Ricci gave the character life. That's like she's a favorite basically, and one of mine too. But the whole thing was just gags. We're talking about a family that lives its life backwards, that essentially compared to regular society. They don't fit in, right? And she is claiming in this idea is that Wednesday doesn't feel like she fits in, which again makes no sense because the whole point is that the whole family doesn't fit in. They're different from everybody else. So like,
did you see that
They're
Netflix
not
series?
supposed to fit in, yeah.
Has anyone seen that Netflix series?
Yeah.
no, I didn't see the Wednesday
I've
show.
heard
She actually goes to a school of people who don't fit in. Like,
Yeah.
It's like somebody thought, well, if we just capitalize on the popularity of the Harry Potter stuff, we could, we take the Addams family and sort of mingle that together with the Harry Potter stuff. We could make something that everybody would like. And then the character was kind of cool. There were some things in it that were kind of cool and everything, but it sort of went down that path of there's a thing that's been happening for quite a while, right? That woke ideologues have been sort of capitalizing on, like of fanfic writers thinking that being decent or good at fanfic makes them real writers.
Not even decent.
It doesn't.
Like,
It doesn't make you a real writer. It makes you very good at expanding on somebody else's work.
Yeah.
In a way that people might enjoy.
Yeah.
And as long as you admit that's what you're doing, that's okay. Like there's not something wrong with that. It's that's your creativity at work. But what you're doing isn't original. You are expanding on someone else's work. And it's not a whole new invention.
Right.
And you're not the same as somebody who created a character and a setting and a storyline and built other characters around that main character and and whatever, they had a thing they were going to communicate with this and so on, and didn't borrow somebody else's already created format to use to tell it. And unfortunately, because our society has kind of accepted over the last maybe 20 years or so this idea that professional fan fiction is as good as new things, or at least as good as real creativity. We've now got a situation where we have to accept when it's bad, like when it's poorly done, absolute shit, and when politics are inserted into it. And it's complete bastardization of the thing that the person would have been expanding on if they were a good fanfic writer, but they're not.
No.
expanding on anybody's anything. They're just taking the name and one popular detail about it and completely twisting it into something else that it never was and never should have been.
Well, that's
And
what's
I
going
think
on
that's
here.
that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, they're trying to make Wednesday into a feminist icon. Like they've already done this with there was a YouTube channel, I don't know if it still exists, called Adult Wednesday Addams, and that girl that plays her in those sketches is totally a feminist because every episode is about some kind of feminist talking point, like sexual harassment or the way that men, are entitled to women's bodies and shit like that. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. This character is not like this. Like, they're weird on purpose. They're macabre on a different level, and it's got nothing to do with rights. It's got nothing to do with politics. And so,
in reality,
the plot for this
if
is that
Wednesday
she
Addams
finds
was upset about something, she
yeah,
would just
the
take the
plot for
person
this
she was
is that
upset
she
about and
finds
put him in a torture
girly
chamber.
magazine in Uncle Fester's room. Why the fuck would he have that? It already assumes that even the men in the family are bad men.
We all know
That's
the
a way of
magazine
making
he
Uncle
would have in his
Fester.
room.
That's a way of making Uncle Fester creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not in like the sort of charming, fun, way that he was. It's like
that's another thing, right? This, and I'm going to take this back to the previous story about depression very briefly. I will bet you the people that did that interview didn't seek out any incels. Just saying.
Probably not.
But they would compare Uncle Fester to incels.
Of course. Although he did have a woman in
at least one, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
that was based off of
she was
a Black Widow, no less.
Yeah, but I think that was actually based off of episodes from the show where Uncle Fester was looking for a girlfriend or a wife or something. It's been a long time since I've watched the original show. I was a little kid. I remember that.
Anyone want to explore Pugsley as he gets older? What goes on with him? Because he was he was just a normal kid who I guess
he was sort of like a Dennis the Menace type.
Indulged in some masochism with his sister. Like he was the one who received the pain while she was the one who delivered the pain. I guess no one gave a shit about Pugsley, which would make him something of a countercultural icon if anyone gave a shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't really do anything with him. But yeah, here's that's kind of like my point is that Quinn is going to, well, she is in the process of trying to co-opt this character without understanding anything about it, because really the best thing you can do with the Addams Family is tell more of these short, quippy, stories that sort of like point at the absurdity of this family. That's what makes it funny. Like watch the Raul Julia movie with Christina Ricci and tell me if the plot even matters. I know there is one because it's still a movie, but tell me if it even matters. Like when everything is resolved, like literally nothing changes because you're not supposed to care about that. You're supposed to laugh at the gags. So
exactly,
which they do very well.
One of the things that that I've noticed whenever these people get in and they take an existing IP and they don't want, they're not interested in the IP.
No.
They're not interested in continuing the story in a believable pattern. They want to talk about themselves through something.
Yes. And they want to take something that has a lot of popularity to do it.
Yes, and that's exactly they as Sargon has said, they don the progressive skin suit of this thing that has an appeal, that has a baked-in audience, and goes, why don't you love this thing? It looks just like the thing you love, even though it's merely acting as my therapy session.
Yep.
You ever
that
wonder
I am foisting upon everyone.
You ever wonder what happened to the Monsters? The Monsters was obviously, it was a rip-off of the Addams Family, let's face it.
Oh, the Munsters? See, the problem with the Munsters was that they were a family that loved each other that just happened to be weird looking.
Well, they were all weird except
their highly deformed niece.
Marilyn Munster. The girl was the normal one. How weird is it that hasn't taken off? Because then they'd have to go because then they'd have to work on the premise that the girl is the normal one, And feminists can't handle that because feminists want to believe that women are the exception, the most exceptional exception, the one that doesn't feel like she belongs even in a family that doesn't belong. And that's why the monsters never took off, especially in the age of feminism, because feminists have to believe that women are the exception, are the diamond in the rough.
You guys do know there was a 2022 Monsters movie, right?
Yeah, it was a Rob Zombie thing.
Yeah, it was one of the worst movies ever made.
Yeah, not good. Nobody wanted that.
It was, yeah. It was Rob Zombie.
The thing is with the monsters, this is the way it has to work is, and Rob Zombie's not capable of doing this because the only thing he knows how to do is dysfunction. The Monsters family was the tightest knit nuclear family. It was based on, the most functional or least dysfunctional family. It just so happened that they were monsters, but they loved each other. It wasn't like the Addamses where they were, you got this sense that they were always plotting to kill each other or torture each other, and they enjoyed it. They got into it. No. The monsters were not like that. They were like the Brady Bunch or some other loving family. They just happened to be monsters. So the only way you could do it is you'd have to present them as a functional family where there's no abuse, there's no dysfunction, there's nothing weird going on, but they also are, Universal Studios monsters. And I don't think that Hollywood can do that because you'd have to give us a family that loves each other, that's the only way that would work. Anyway, you wouldn't be able to find anybody to replace most of those actors, like Fred Gwynn and the guy who played Grandpa. Good luck with that. Maybe DeVito? That might work.
Possibly. One of the things I think it's really sad that I think the Addams family really could make a comeback in current year.
Sure could.
Because they're transgressive now, but for all the opposite reasons. Like you look at them when they came out, in the
90s.
I'm gonna get this name wrong I'm gonna get this date wrong in the 50s. And
the 60s, the black and white show.
The people of the 60s are like, wow, what a weird, what a strange family. They have, strange pets and they all dress in black and they're so macabre and violence and oh man, this is nuts. And in current year, it'd be the same, a similar reaction. People would look and go, wow, what a strange family. What a crazy family. They love each other. The mother and father are still together. They have 2 children that both seem to love and admire them. How crazy is that? No one does that.
Yeah. You're right. And, that would be weird.
And by the way, props to Jenny Ortega, by the way, who played Wednesday in Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because apparently she pushed back hardcore.
She got a lot of shit for it from
not just from the writers,
people, not just from writers and the people she worked with, from literal fucking podcasters that do reviews of shows. They were basically calling her toxic because she wanted to be as true to the character as possible.
Yes,
even though
they wanted to give her a lesbian love interest, and her response to that was simply, "Wednesday doesn't do love interests.
She doesn't do love."
Right. This is definitely obviously she's a true professional, and this is where when you hear a woman getting called toxic by these people, by the woke mob, it's almost always for being accountable
or standing up for themselves.
In this instance, I mean that's accountable. She is when you are an entertainer who portrays an existing character, you are a steward of the trueness of the character. Right? You can actually either warp that character in response to requests or demands, or you can gatekeep that character and say, wait a minute, no, this character would never do this. And it takes a true professional to care enough about what they're doing to fight back against demands to make those warp changes and everything.
Yeah. That's what Henry Cavill did too with The Witcher. That's why he got into
Right.
so much shit. I think the
we
show's
need more
gonna get
Jenny
canceled now.
Ortegas, and we need more Henry Cavills.
Right.
Yeah, we need more. We need more Jenna Ortegas, and we need more Henry Cavills.
And I have to wonder how often, because when they say toxic when it's a woman, and
They
when it's
do.
a man, they treat him like he's aggressive and
Frightening.
yeah, harassing and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
I have to wonder how often, you know, like either wokies or women in general, like feminists in particular, treat a man as though he's aggressive and threatening when he's actually just being accountable.
Yep. Well, anyway, I
fun
just want to let
fact,
you
by
guys
the way.
know that.
I got to share this one thing
Okay.
that a lot of people don't know. I learned this a couple weeks ago, and it's really great. So in the '91 Addams Family movie, the Angelica Houston, Raul Julia, Christopher Lloyd one, Pugsley is played by an actor named Jimmy Workman. I don't expect anyone to know that name, but he's a guy you know, even though you might not know him. If you've
Really?
ever seen the stereotypical fedora neckbeard picture,
Oh
you know the one
no,
I'm
that's
talking
him.
about? Same guy.
Oh shit, dude!
I put it in live show.
It's Pugsley.
Same guy.
Holy shit!
Yep.
I gotta share this.
And it's funny, he didn't even know he was a meme. And then he learned of it, and he's like, "This is great. I love this. I love that I'm famous again." And
That's amazing.
and apparently the story of this comes from he was doing some headshots because he was a child actor initially, and he was an actor later in life as well. And he was taking he was doing some headshots because of course you're no one in Hollywood unless you have some headshots to pass around, get your name out there, get your face out there.
Yeah.
And he did it with a friend, and the friend's like, well, we got a couple of pictures on the roll left. And he's like, let's just do some funny ones.
Oh my god.
And this was one of the funny ones.
That's amazing.
Cute. That's funny.
That's the same dude, guys. Yes, he is the fedora guy. Pugsley, the Reddit, the Reddit guy. All right. Thanks. That was a nice bit of trivia I did not know about.
He's going to be remembered long after Christina Ricci is dead and buried.
Yes, yes, he's immortal. He's immortalized now. So we're gonna go into the after show to talk about Grand Theft Auto 6. If you guys want to join us, become a Badger. Go to feedthebadger.com, set up a monthly subscription. You'll be able to watch the bonus content, and you'll also be able to, if you pay at a higher level, join us in the discussion. And we're gonna just wrap it up here. So if you guys like this video, please smash like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about the stories we discussed today, and please, please, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of HBR News, and we will talk to you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.